It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to the October edition of Learning Now TV. I can't even believe we are 3/4 of the way through the year, waiting for the clocks to change. The mornings are dark. The weather certainly doesn't know what it's doing. I don't know if the economy even knows what it's doing, or the government, but there we are. We find ourselves in this topsy-turvy time. What have we got, Nigel, to see us through the cold and often dark moments?
What we have, Kate, is a Learning Now TV that does know what it's doing. And to illustrate that point, I will highlight three of our speakers. The first one is Robin Hobb. Normally, Robin the ranter, Robin telling us his views of the world. This time, he's interviewing Robert Brinkerhoff. Brinkerhoff, the evaluation guy, the success case method guy, one of my big heroes. We've finally got him on the show. So I'm absolutely delighted. And I think that will be a recording that will come back and back and back. Keep giving, because he's an excellent guy. I've met him on a couple of occasions. So please lock that in. And Martin Cousins is back with another report. This time, the Mind Tools benchmark survey. I think this is the 15th year. But this year is particularly interesting. And Martin, with a little gentle nudge from me, try and bring out some of its essence. So if you're interested at all in Mind Tools Benchmark Survey, listen to the report. And if you've never heard of it or don't know anything about it, listen to the report and then go and download it and read it. And finally, Vanessa Alzate talks about TikTok for learning. As far as I know, she's the first person, certainly that I'd spoken to, but the first person I know who's been using TikTok for learning for a good while. So that's a kind of interesting insight to a new avenue for learning. So that's today. Enjoy the show.
Enjoy the show.
This month, I've had the very great pleasure of speaking with Professor Robert Brinkerhoff, Emeritus Professor at West Michigan University. He's the founder of the Brinkerhoff Evaluation Institute and is perhaps best known to many of us because of his work on the success case method. He's written over a dozen books, he's contributed to many more, and he continues to advise organisations around the world, including acting as Senior Advisor and Head of Evaluation for Promote International. I caught up with Rob from his home in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where he talked to me about his career to date and what really makes training have an impact back in the workplace. So, Rob Brinkerhoff, welcome to Learning Now TV. We're honoured to have you on the programme. I guess most of the audience will know you from the success case method. So, it would be interesting to understand a little bit about what the success case method is and I suppose how it came about.
Right. Yeah, well, a great lead in. It came about because I was in graduate school and I got lured into a graduate program in program evaluation, got very interested in it and did a doctoral study in that. And that took me into a lot of work with a research facility outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia, and we were doing evaluations of training programs for government agencies, Department of Defense, school districts, and the like. And that experience of having to evaluate training programs, we rubbed up right away against the issue of, well, evaluate them as to expectations for what? So much of evaluation of training being done was evaluating learning. Is it happening? Are people learning something useful? And what I discovered quickly was that that the training itself could be quite successful from a learning perspective, but if we followed up learners, if we defined training from the point of view of not are people learning stuff, but why are they learning it? What does the person paying for this organization expect to get from it, or paying for that learning expect to get from it? And that took me then to start investigating what happened to people after training and how successful were they using the training in their organization. And that word success percolated to the top because we started looking for successes. And what we found is we could find lots of successes from a learning perspective. Maybe 80 people out of 100 learned it, but then successes from an application, are they using it in their work perspective? That dropped down to 15, 10, 15, 20%. So we had to start defining training from a success perspective that said, are people using it in a way that's making a difference to their organization? And that just led me in a whole new path now to look at not just the success case method as a tool for evaluating training, but what we're learning from it as a tool for making training work.
Sure. And in terms of what you did learn, what was the issue? Why was one person implementing things back in the workplace and another, or maybe another 7 or 8, not doing anything back in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, that was exactly what we were looking for. And we started interviewing people in the who had been successful in the training and finding out what's going on at work. And right away, I discovered an experience and that echoed back to me from 8 years earlier when I was an officer in the United States Navy. And I was working on a shore station that was tracking Russian submarines all around the ocean and trying to quickly communicate their location to aircraft who could confirm where they were or not. And I got sent in my very first year up to a 2-week training course in Norfolk, Virginia, a communications training where we learned how to handle communications much more quickly, how to articulate them more quickly, and with the technology to move them around faster and get the right people oriented to what was going on out in that ocean at the right time. Brilliant course, loved it. I was the star student. Came back to the base after after that training, and I'd been back a few hours when the captain stopped by my quarters and welcomed me back to the base. But then he waxed philosophical for a minute and said, Brinkerhoff, we can look at the world in 2 ways. And I said, what 2 ways are those, sir? And he said, well, there's the way you learned that up there in Norfolk, and there's the way you would do things here. And then he asked me, so where are you right now? And I said, well, I'm here, of course. And he said, then how are we going to do things? And I said, the way we do them here. And right. So he did, in about a 1-minute conversation, he undid all the impact we could have gained from that training. So that was one of the things we discovered right away, was that phenomenon was recurring over and over again. Maybe not so blatantly as happened with me, but more surreptitiously. The failure of an organization to communicate to trainees, look, we don't only expect you to learn this stuff, we expect you to use it. And we're going to hold you accountable for using it. And we expect your manager to support you in using it. When we started looking at those factors, we realized, wow, the seed that training can plant has to land in fertile soil in the organization. And there's a lot of elements that go into whether it's going to be nurtured grow into improved performance, or if it's going to wither on the vine.
Absolutely. And your studies, I think, showed that it didn't just matter what happened when people had finished, when you came back from Norfolk, Virginia and spoke to your captain,
right? But
also what had happened in advance of that. So just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, what we learned as we started looking at, we followed up the success case method. We always followed the people after the training to find out what was going on. But most of the breakdowns in the training, like my manager's not supporting the training, I don't have time to do this in my job, there's no reward or incentive for doing this new behavior, people want me to do it the old way. All of those after conditions were spawned by before conditions. Why does a manager not support it? Well, because they had no idea why I was going in the first place and hadn't bought into the need for it. Why were there not the performance measures in place to support it and give feedback? That's because they hadn't been created. The training was never aligned with the performance system before that. So all of the lag indicators that tell you that training is broken, almost all of them have their birth in stuff that should have been in place before the training.
So those prerequisites, I'm going on this program and I understand why, and the support once I come back from being involved, whatever that training intervention is, that sounds to me like a process. And I know you've written recently about this idea of learning journeys, and you're working with Promote International in Stockholm about how to create and support learning journeys. So what are the components there that make a difference to that performance improvement that you've identified as being the true success?
Well, the key ingredient is the magic word that you just said, journey, learning journey. That I think for decades we've conceived of training and we've sold it, and our clients have bought it as if it were an event, not a process. And so a good 2-day workshop, a good 3-day workshop, they want to be sure that that event is beautifully tailored and engineered and manufactured and delivered. But the before and after conditions will not be in place if it's not construed of as and conceived of as a process. So impactful learning is never an event, it's always a process. And it's a process of building the before conditions, making sure they're aligned and right. Things like senior leadership are bought into the rationale for the training. They make their expectations clear that they want it to be used. They make it clear to managers that they will be held accountable for holding their employees accountable for using the training. All of those conditions before, if they're not in place, the training seed will die. And then afterwards, of course, there has to be opportunities to try it, feedback, coaching, and a willingness on the part of the organization to tolerate risk, because people are not always going to be successful using the training the first time out. No one ever is. So it has to be construed as a journey and managed as a journey. And in that way, the COVID pandemic, as awful as it's been, has helped us in learning and development, because it forced us to, we couldn't run those 2-day workshops or 3-day workshops anymore. We had to do it differently. So that has been, we've got a big leg up now on understanding it is a journey. It has to be a journey, and we got to design it and manage it that way.
And the manager's role is part of that piece, but you talk there about the kind of organizational role, the idea that the organization is bought into the training as being an important factor in achieving the performance goals that you want to see. I see that occasionally absent, the idea that the senior managers, if they've been in the loop at all, they certainly weren't obviously in the loop. It wasn't transparent that they were there. But I also see that communication through the hierarchy as being minimal at best. So how do you go about enabling that process to happen? How do you support organizations to really take their investment in their people a little bit more seriously and strategically?
Well, that's how they certainly have to take it more seriously, and we can't just have the people who need the results, the operational senior leadership of the company, just hand off the problem to the learning and development function, say, go get me some good, brilliant leadership training, we need it, and let me know when it's done. They can't manage it that way. It's going to have to be, the organization will have to learn that you can't delegate accountability for learning results to the learning and development department if you define learning results and the value of training as performance. So it can't be delegated that way. How do you teach the organization that? And that's where I think we come full circle back to evaluation and measurement, because we can start informing managers and senior leaders about hey, the good news is this training worked. It's helped us increase sales. It's helped us decrease scrap. It's helped us build market share. The bad news is it's only doing that 15 to 20% of the time.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at what would it take to do it 80% of the time. We can't do it on our own, but we can certainly do it as a partnership. And we know now that it can make a difference. Let's get it making more of a difference. So I think that being truthful about training, whether it works or not, and feeding that information back to the organization. I know when I've sat with senior executives and said, you wanted this training to improve market share. It's been doing that, but it isn't doing it all the time. And they'll say, why isn't it? And that's the key. Once they say, why isn't it? Now we can start saying, well, because here's what the managers did where it's working. Here's what they were doing. Here's what their senior leaders were doing. Here's what people weren't doing when it didn't work. So the answer is pretty clear. And then I've seen that get traction. And many organizations have built on that. They are now holding managers accountable in their job descriptions for supporting training. And they can be fired if they don't.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think the things that people are getting wrong, which is around that communication, it's about the consistency. It's also about this idea that there are no quick fixes. That I think quite a lot of organizations believe that having a course solves the problem. The fact that somebody's booked in a conference room somewhere means that the problem has gone away. When of course, in many ways, you've barely scratched the surface of the challenge at that point.
Absolutely not.
And that have you got, kind of a one sentence advice for people within learning and development? How do you get organizations, how do you get senior teams, how do you get managers to buy into that idea that it is a process, that it's not a quick fix, that we are not, we're not going to prescribe them some tablets that they can take to cure their problem. They have to do something about it.
Again, I think feedback is the breakfast of champions here and needs to be given. So I want to make sure that when managers who have done things right and gotten results, that they're recognized for that and that the organization applauds that effort and rewards it, and make it clear that tell the truth about training and development. When it works, say why it worked. Don't try to take credit for it. Don't do an ROI study that showed the training department was, accountable for getting all this. It's always a partnership. So we've got to make sure that people understand when we got results, why did we get them, what was their value, and what do we need to do to get more results, more valuable like that. When they get that feedback, they'll act on it. Managers are paid to get results. If we can show them how the training helps them get the results they're accountable for, they'll support it. And until they get that evidence, they won't. And they shouldn't.
Rob Brinkhoff, it's been a joy to speak with you and to share this conversation. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Have a good rest of the day. Cheers.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it very much, Robin. Bye.
Upskill and inform your learners with Mind Tools for Business. Empower your people to thrive at work and help them step up and meet everyday workplace challenges with confidence. Our toolkit provides unlimited access to thousands of quality-assured resources, all in one place. It's easy to use and on demand, anytime, anywhere. Experience stress-free onboarding with dedicated client partner support. And get access to our library of industry insight and expert analysis. Perform, manage, lead with Mind Tools for Business. Visit mindtoolsbusiness.com to find out more.
Rob Clark is back as ever with the latest news and a roundup of all that's coming and going in L&D. But he's got three interesting additional items that I should highlight. The first is he goes behind the scenes at OEB Berlin. That is very interesting, particularly if you haven't been, gives you a little taste for it. Secondly, he looks at evaluation and tries to query why this is so important, and yet L&D is so underprepared for it. And finally, he asks a really basic question. Is L&D ready to help businesses in recession? So be sure to catch this month's Learning News from Rob Clark.
OEB, the annual EdTech conference in Berlin, returns live in person this November, and its chairperson Rebecca Strohmeyer thinks learning needs reimagining. How well prepared is L&D to help business in recession? Totara's new CEO says this time it's different. Measuring impact, high on the list of priorities, but bottom of the list of abilities. We've got a guide to help people get started. OEB Online Educa, the longest standing of the big European EdTech and workplace learning events, is back. OEB survived the pandemic and is back bigger and better than ever this November in Berlin.
OEB always brought the community together who believed in online learning. As a result of COVID, everybody has to now believe in online learning. So I think from that perspective, it's become far more relevant to all of us. There are so many different sub-themes because we have such a diverse audience that we need to make sure that we cater everybody's interests with the sub-themes. For example, we have the debate will be about the metaverse. So we're looking at new trends there. But what happens at OEB is that you're completely immersed. We make the conference in such a way that it's very, very interactive. So you're not just a passive viewer. You get involved. You ask questions. You give your opinion. And we also have a huge networking focus. So I think if you're looking to meet people, like-minded people with different perspectives and growing your network and to learn and to be fully immersed and to have a lot of fun and to be inspired, that's the place to go to.
Totara has a new CEO. Mark Ash joins with a background in growing technology businesses. Firstly, Mark, recession is coming. L&D traditionally gets cut in a recession. How well prepared do you think L&D is this time around to perhaps better serve business?
I mean, the whole great COVID experience has really shone a lens on how agile businesses need to be to weather future storms. And those companies that were agile to change their business model or to change how they service customers were the ones that really came out much stronger as a result. And I think that what that's told us is that we need to be storm-proof, and in order to do that, you need to take learning and development really seriously. It's too expensive to in some areas to fight in the global bun fight over good people. That's not a scalable solution. So companies are really taking learning and development much more seriously because it's future-proofing the business against future risk. Typically in the past, when a recession came, it may have been orientated around economic factors associated with manufacturing output or production output in a certain way. Digitization drives much greater efficiency, much greater mobility for an organization, allows them to compete and adapt on a global basis much better than peers that aren't. So learning and development is the catalyst behind us being able to better adapt in the future. And I think that companies are taking it more seriously as a result.
How do you measure impact? If you've been in L&D long enough, you will have been confronted with questions about the impact of learning solutions. Your internal voice may say, yes, of course we make a difference, but you probably also have a sense of unease thinking about your ability to prove it. You're not alone. Brandon Hall Group's 2020 Learning Measurement Study found that fewer than 16% have really got to grips with measuring business impact for any of their learning. And most struggle measuring virtually everything else. Even metrics like participation and satisfaction, never mind knowledge transfer and behaviour change. In 2019, Learning Analytics was a new entry at number 3 in Donald Taylor's Global L&D Sentiment Survey, and it's not been out of the top 5 since. Despite this sentiment, the LPI has L&D's learning analytics abilities consistently bottom of the L&D skills that it monitors. Earlier this year, Kineo published a guide to help learning professionals with learning analytics.
You know, it's been sort of the holy grail that the learning industry has been chasing for a long time. Most projects we work on in learning industry, we can't get the traction, the investment, and the resources to actually pursue it. The paper we wrote is really about how do you broaden your tool set so that you're not reliant on something that you may only get an opportunity to pursue in limited cases. But looking at business impact, good learning design starts with understanding the business problem, understanding the behaviors, the outcomes we want to change, and what's the role of that learner that we're targeting with our training in terms of accomplishing that business outcome.
Growing your people can get pretty messy, but degreed learning experience makes it neat by giving your workforce the flexibility to learn when, where, and how they want, and giving you the power to guide their growth so you can solve today's challenges while building the skills to take on tomorrow.
Martin Cousins, it's lovely to see you again. It has been a while, but we're back on the road again. We will be recording regular reports on interesting publications relevant for everyone in L&D. And today, Martin has chosen the annual L&D benchmark report, which is by Mind Tools, which is called Is Learning Culture Keeping Pace with Rapid Digitalization? Fantastic question. And Martin, tell us, do they answer it? And is there anything else that we ought to be noticing in this benchmark, which has probably been running for about 10 or 15 years now?
Yeah. So it's a long-running, longitudinal survey. So thousands of people have added their input over the years. And this year, it was 772 learning leaders basically were surveyed, and they're mostly in the UK. Well, 50% of them in the UK, and then that's kind of spread around the kind of core regions of the rest of the world. And I think, does it give you an answer? It's a benchmark. So basically, people are asked to share how they're doing across quite a lot of measures, and that's just brought together, and then it's all turned into this report. And this report does have some kind of instruments to try and make sense of it. So there's this, it looks at maturity of L&D teams, and it also looks at how it takes kind of an overall look at the data to create an index, which it calls the Organizational Learning Index, and it basically pulls that. Now, to do it justice, you really need to read the report just to understand how these instruments work. But basically, they're trying to do the sense making of the data. That's effectively what they're doing. So in the report, you will get lots of graphs and charts that will tell you that the kind of digital tools that L&D have been using over the last year, those kinds of things. But actually, the Organizational Learning Index will tell you about 6 things, which are learning impact, strategic and business alignment, environment, talent and culture, employee experience, organization engagement, and L&D team capability. Now, so they're the threads that run through the report. So in answer to the question, is the learning culture keeping pace with rapid digitalization? In terms of maturity, the answer is kind of, I think, an emphatic no. I think it looks at maturity, and what I would, and I think this is, I'm just pulling out a couple of things that I think are quite interesting. Maturity, there are 4 levels of maturity, and at level 1 being the least mature L&D teams, right? 56% of teams are at level 1, and that means that transactional interventions that have superficial impact. So even if, and most L&D teams are clearly, digital first now because they had to be, even if they're digital, they could still be looking at doing transactional interventions with digital. So the idea that, have we gone, are we keeping pace with digitalization, actually could be a bit of a rabbit hole because you could answer that yes, but you could just be delivering transactional learning, and therefore the impact on the organization and employees may not be as high as if you're more mature. So the second level of maturity, which is basically around implementing L&D programs, which they still say has a relatively low impact. There's 22% at that stage, 12% at level 3, which is proactive talent and performance strategy, and 11% at level 4, which is a basically high impact with what they call a high impact learning culture. So really, this is a story of what technologies are being adopted in delivering digital.
Yes.
So and I don't think we'd be too surprised to say virtual classrooms and these kinds of things. That's not, that's all in the report. But I think actually it's the maturity is probably the thing that we should really be looking at now, because is it about high impact digital intervention and developing cultures of learning that at the heart have digital processes and tools, or is it transactional? And I think transactional is at the bottom, and that's where most people are. So I think that's quite an interesting thing to highlight.
Yeah, it's always ever thus, really, isn't it? They've been talking about this for 5 years, I think, and the figures haven't changed much. But the point they also want to make is that if you're a high-performing organization, then you're very, very unlikely to be transactional. You won't be transactional L&D. So that if you want to make the maximum impact, you've got to move up their slope or jump between their hooks towards a performing learning and high-performing organization. But what interested me as well, Martin, is what are top-performing organizations doing right? And we developed our managers to be coaches. 79% of the high performers, 9% of the sort of also rans. Performance management is integrated into our learning strategy. 69% of the high performers, 11% of the lowest level. We focus on achieving desired performance outcomes for employees. 86% of high performance organizations. I needn't go on. The point is that there is, I think, a slightly widening gap between those who take their L&D seriously, those who develop their managers to do more than just make sure the KPIs are put in place, and who generally integrate whatever they do with what the business needs to do and don't operate as a sort of separate company within a company or organization within an organization. They perform much, much better. So it's not saying if you did 70%, if you were high impact organization, 79% therefore of your staff would be developing their, or 79% of the companies will be developing their managers to be coaches. It's the other way around. It's because we have most of our managers trained to be coaches, we become this high impact organization. So it's giving you some pretty clear things that you've got to do if you want to get results. And that makes it interesting reading, and it is full of data. It is one of the better reports, I think. It's a kind of, it's turned a corner from many of the reports recently, which just seem to say everything's the same as it was last year. It's just it's got a teeny bit better or a minuscule bit worse. This is actually saying, let's point the way to developing a culture of continuous and collaborative learning. And if you do, you will become high performing. So that's the causal relationship, which is fascinating, I think. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think also I agree with that, but I would also focus on the fact that when we talk about digital transformation, there are so many factors that aren't digital at play that have the biggest impact. So,
and even in this report, they say that too. So, culture of continuous continuous coaching culture. That's not digital, or very rarely digital.
Well, it might, but the tools might be within that.
But it's irrelevant, really, isn't it?
But actually, what I find, I would just point to this short list, which I think is very telling and not altogether surprising, but it's worth remembering that there's a table on what's called legacy expectations. And basically, there are some expectations here that L&D professionals find somewhat or very concerning. And these are almost across the board, nearly 100% of respondents say they are somewhat or very concerning. Reluctance of managers to encourage new ways of learning and working. Leaders have traditional expectations of L&D that are difficult to challenge. Reluctance of managers to make time for learning. Lack of investment to future-proof L&D approaches. Now, none of that is to do with digital.
Yes,
it's got everything to do with L&D being a credible team in the business. And I think, one thing that this report does talk about, and it always has talked about, is business alignment. And I think, it's one thing to think about digital transformation. It's completely different to be thinking about how L&D becomes a very credible part of the business, and the tools that it uses might be digital. Increasingly, that is the case. But actually, there are these other massive issues of what does L&D stand for? Yes. How credible is it? Why how do you turn the beliefs, expectations, and motivations of managers around so that they really support and enable people to develop new skills? Those kind of issues haven't gone away, and I think that's an important part of this.
It's true,
report.
And therefore, it's almost like the report is the sum total of the report is bigger than its parts. It's presenting something much more complex and interesting than the title would suggest, which is all about digital skills. And that makes it well worth downloading. It's available from the Mind Tools website. It's completely free. And anyone who is in L&D really does need to read this benchmark report. I've said that in previous years, not so much. If you're interested, read it, but it's not going to change the world. This is beginning to become a pretty fundamental tool in L&D's toolbox, the annual report. And I like this one, I must say, Martin. I liked it better than lots of others that I've read. So keep it going, please, Mind Tools, and listen to Martin. Keep your focus broad, and people will be really intrigued. Martin, thank you so much. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to be back. Thanks, Nigel.
Good. I'm absolutely thrilled this morning to be talking to Vanessa Alzate. Vanessa is an instructional designer by trade, but also a founder of Anchored Training. And what we're going to talk about is something fascinating, and that is using TikTok for learning. And it's got huge potential. Not many people talk about that, and I suspect very few people use it. So Vanessa, how did you get involved in that, and what have you actually done? And just tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the beginning of the pandemic, just like everybody else, I started people posting all these dancing videos, and I was like, what is this platform? And it didn't really seem so much for me. And then a friend of mine reshared a video of a vegetable peeler going back and forth. And she was like, did you even know that it did this? And I had no idea. I thought to myself, I have been peeling a vegetable one way. I could have saved so much time by knowing this one tool went back and forth, although probably would not have been safe for my fingers. I probably would have made some cuts. So maybe it's better I didn't know this, but I thought, wow, I could learn that in 7 seconds. What else could I learn on this platform? And over time, I just started really observing the platform and seeing how people were utilizing it. A lot of coaches, consultants were using it to educate their audiences. And over time, I really saw how this platform started to develop into a platform that was less about the singing and the dancing and the lip syncing and the funny skits, and more actually about education. And then I thought, wow, there's probably a lot here that we could learn. And it was really just all about keeping, when I really dove in, it was about keeping all the content short, concise, not a lot of text, and making something that is relatable to the learner, to keep them watching and wanting more. And I said, well, micro learning, storytelling, all these various things that we talk about in learning development, this platform is doing and capturing. And it's even become so big that they're marketing the Learn on TikTok hashtag. So I was actually just watching Hulu the other day, and an ad popped up, and it's from TikTok talking about all the different things that you can learn on it and funneling people to the platform to learn more. It's quite interesting how they're really taking this and really making an educational platform.
It's absolutely true. And what is amazing is that you suggested it, and now TikTok have picked it up and run with it.
I know, I should have gotten a cut from it.
You should have done. You should have done. So is it the platform? Is it the way that TikTok is structured? Does that really help you put together learning material? Or is it just the idea of very short videos, which is basically what TikTok's features?
So I think there's two things when we talk about TikTok that make it really one of the best learning platforms out there. First is the style, right? It's very authentic. There's not a ton of creators that are doing a lot of fancy things. I think YouTube for a while started doing a lot of things that had, professional backgrounds, all this professional editing, and TikTok feels a lot more accessible because anybody can pick up their phone, do a quick TikTok style video. And sometimes all you're doing is talking to the camera, and maybe you're just cutting it in ways where you're doing one sentence facing one way, and then maybe you're moving, around your office and doing another piece of the content just to bring a little bit of that interest. But it really does engage you, and you want to learn more, and you want to see what they're talking about next. So I think it's about that style, right? And really honing in on what we like to call edutainment. So educating while entertaining. So I think that is something that is a really powerful thing that we can utilize. But the other thing that I've been recently really keyed in on with this platform is the algorithm, because the algorithm is based on your interests and not necessarily social. So things like Instagram and Facebook, it relies on you being friends with certain people in order to see content. However, TikTok took that to the side, it put it in its own feed, and what it really prompts you is the For You page. So what are things that, because you watch certain TikTok videos, what are other styles of TikToks, or what are other subjects and things like that that would be of interest to you? And it's starting to feed you that. And when you think about it, over time, you kind of might grow away from the interests of those that you follow, and you're trying to find more people that talk about things that you might be interested in. And TikTok feeds you, where other platforms you have to go out and search for it, which a lot of us don't do. And so I was speaking with a colleague at one of our learning technologies, and I said, have you thought about, instead of doing the likes and things like that on your platform, utilizing an interest-based algorithm? It's a little bit more difficult, but I think when we talk about upskilling our employees, we should be thinking about what might be topics that they might be interested that will help their career and help upskill them professionally, and start to feed them that, as opposed to waiting for their colleague to like something or to favorite it or to comment on it so it pulls it onto their algorithm. That is relying on someone else to do the work of providing someone else with the content. Why don't we have the tool provide the content to the learner and tell them what are some things of interest they might enjoy?
So you like the way TikTok operates, i.e. the technology itself is good, helpful, cool, useful. You like the fact that it forces you to do things simply without complex editing or anything else, so it helps you get it out there. And you like the algorithm, you like the way that it pulls interest together. So you end up almost like your personal learning channel in a sense, if you keep going.
Yeah.
That's what you end up with. It
really is. When we talk about personalized learning, this is a way to get personalized learning without having to create content or streams for every single person at your organization, which could be, we manage so much content now that if we can utilize a platform to help create that content or those paths for others, it personalizes it for you.
I get it. So you've used it. You've used it as a consumer and as a producer.
Yes, so both. So I'm on TikTok and Instagram Reels, which Instagram Reels is trying to copy TikTok, and we also utilize YouTube Shorts.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised that LinkedIn has not jumped on the train, to be honest. But all of the social media platforms are trying to jump on what TikTok has started.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I think it's a very interesting and helpful trend. Vanessa, on the screen, people will see the link here. So if anyone is interested in following up with Vanessa or getting in touch with Anchored Training, then please use the link. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for drawing our attention to something that is extremely interesting, extremely innovative, and practical and helpful at the same time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Maybe we'll do that later. Hey, so you can see, this is just like using a whiteboard in a classroom. And then you do my 3-year-old's favourite, you just have a nice little wiggle. 1, 2, 3, rate it now.
A really quick question, you might want to answer this later.
You see, I love this.
Dry your eyes, because it's Bob Mosher's last episode in his series with Learning Now TV. It's a corker though, as he's recapping what L&D should be doing to really truly support learners in the way that we should be.
Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the final episode of the Elevating Performance series. Bob Mosher here. It is great to have you back, and hopefully these series have been helpful. In this final episode, friends, what I'm going to do is try to put a bow around all the ones that have come before this and cover some of the key points and key issues that we tried to discuss around moving from that of a training mindset and being seen as the training department to one of a performance mindset where we're seen, frankly, as more integral with the business. So the 4 different points I'm going to cover is basically starting with just that. What we talked about extensively in some of the earlier episodes, friends, is that the learning groups that have done this successfully are ones that have moved in their own mind as one of being a training or an L&D, frankly, department to one of being a performance-based or a performance-centric department. It helps us change that conversation from one of, I would like 5 days of training, or I'd like 3 e-learnings to do the following thing, to organizations and the companies we support coming into our offices and having a very different conversation with us. One about performance deliverables, one about KPIs, one about being involved earlier in the conversation when these important programs are being launched in our organizations. We don't want to be a checklist, right, or an order taker downstream. We want to be much more integral and important upstream. So the first thing it starts, friends, is in the conversations we have and the way we see ourselves in moving from one of that the job we do is not training, the job we do is one of performance. Now, when you change those conversations and they start talking to us about different kinds of deliverables, obviously we have to have a methodology to do that. So the first thing that comes to mind with that, friends, is that we have to change from what has been, if I may, historically an ADDIE-based design approach to one that's much more performance. We have to learn to architect our solutions in a very different way. So methodology leads the way, friends. It is what we do. So we have to move into this world of workflow learning. We have to move into methodologies and approaches that let us look at how we design from the very beginning into one that is very performance focused and begins with a moment of apply. We have to design from apply back, not from new or more, as I talked about the 5 moments of need, back. We have to know what apply is, and we have to begin there in our design and use methodologies that allow us to do that. Now, that involves something called workflow learning, right? We talked about moving into that whole world of what workflow learning is, and that means we have to be able to understand what the workflow is. This is such an important pivot in the way that we look at things. I shared in the earlier episodes that I was very taken back by the fact that when I finally learned how to do this differently and go from performance back, when I realized how much and how little of what my learners went back to on the job really was. So we have to understand what workflow learning design is and what designing for a workflow first means. What are the tasks? What are the supporting knowledge? What are the assets? What are the demands that a learner has in the workflow that I can map my design and my outputs and my deliverables to? So how do I move to one that is workflow first and understand and design for what the workflow truly is? Number 3, workflow-based design. Now, number 4, and one that always sits in the back of all the work we do, we design in technology today. We have to have tools in which we do the different things that we do. So we have to understand that part of this mindset, part of shifting to and elevating performance is being able to deliver performance-based deliverables. And as I talked about extensively, this idea of shifting to what is a digital coach, or what's been known in our industry for years as an EPSS, is where we have to shift to. You know, when we went to e-learning, we moved to e-learning authoring tools. We didn't author in PowerPoint, although we probably could have made them in that, right? We knew that to do e-learning successfully and in scale, we had to move to e-learning based design tools. Well, if you're going to move to a performance first and elevate performance in the work that we do, we have to have authoring environments that let us do just that. Let us author for the workflow, let us offer in a performance-based approach, and that is moving into an electronic performance support authoring environment or a digital coach authoring environment, and there are many of them on the market right now that let us move beyond SharePoint or other tools that we've used historically. So friends, what I hope this has helped you do is understand that we really need to, in the world we live in today, with COVID and all the things we're addressing, is that we have to become more integral to having impact on performance. We can't be seen as the training department anymore. We have to step up and figure out ways to move our work into the workflow and into performance so that we're supporting it and getting an ROI and measurability on what we do every day, impacting the business and what it tries to get accomplished every day. So friends, I hope this has been helpful. You know where I live. Please reach out. Love to talk to you more about this, and it's been an honor to be a part of this series throughout the whole time. Be well, be safe, and please be in touch.
Well, just like that, in a bat of an eye, we're over for another month. Nigel, what stood out to you this month?
Well, it has to be my good friend, Robert Brinkerhoff. I thought that interview was really, really interesting. And it just took it all back and made me go and reflect and think and maybe go and read a bit more. Brinkerhoff, such an interesting guy, thoughtful guy, getting on a bit in the years at the moment, so probably not traveling as much or doing as much, but I think he has a lasting legacy, and that really cheered me up. And also that, you know, the Mind Tools benchmark study, I think it's probably the best one I've read ever, or certainly one of the best I've read for 5 or 6 years, because what they're seeing is the relationship between good quality learning and culture. So they're really focusing on how organizations make or break themselves and create good learning environments or destroy those learning environments. And I think that is a really important point. It's not just down to the nitty-gritty of, oh, we offer 10 courses this year and last year we only offered 5. It's all about building a climate where people feel able to admit they don't know, can find time to build into their learning, are not afraid to ask for help. That's just as important as having 7,000 courses on an LMS. I really believe that. So good stuff. Good stuff. Any conferences, Kate? What have you
there are, and I'm just going to interject there as well, because I think the Brinkerhoff interview with Robin reminds me to remind everybody that all of our interviews can be searched for by the speaker. So you don't have to watch the whole episode. If you just want to go back and watch a particular, segment or particular interview, I do think that will be one that people will go back to individually as well. So as much as it's only quite Nigel and I, you don't have to do that. You can just curate some of the highlights via the website as well. So I thought that was a good reminder.
Yes, it's a really good point. And when we're talking about content, as we just were, there's a huge amount of content now. There's really interesting material going back over the years, hundreds of interviews. Not all of them you maybe want to curate, but there's at least a handful which are gems. But you won't find them unless you search individually on the website.
Yeah, you can search by speaker.
You can indeed.
And then looking ahead, I've got a list of exciting events. So fresh off the back of Unleash World in Paris for me, we are looking at the 6th to the 9th of November. Our friends at Closer Still are running Learning 2022 in Orlando with the Learning Guild. So 9th to the 10th is the CIPD ACE annual conference and exhibition in Manchester. The 23rd to the 25th is Online Educa, always a fascinating event. And then this is a good one to see. On the 30th of November, 1st of December is the CIPD's Diversity and Inclusion Conference. So good to see that being headlined as well.
You're absolutely right. Okay, that's excellent. So our next program is on the 24th of November, at which point I will be in Australia. But Kate, you will be around to hold the fort in the UK, and we will see you then with, I hope, a whole bunch of really interesting people, ideas, and conferences to share with you. So thank you very much indeed. Till November. Kate, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Nigel, and see you next time when we're all starting to feel a little bit festive.
We will indeed. Goodbye.